By the end of this day, the most powerful woman in the ancient world would be gone. Egypt, as an independent kingdom, would cease to exist. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which had ruled for nearly 3 centuries, would collapse in a matter of hours. But 24 hours earlier, none of this was inevitable. On August 12th, 30 BCE, Cleopatra VII woke in her palace in Alexandria. The sun rose over the Mediterranean as it always had. The royal residence still stood. Her servants still moved through marble corridors. The rituals of power continued, even as that power slipped away. She had ruled Egypt for 21 years. She had negotiated with Julius Caesar, formed alliances with Mark Antony, and kept her kingdom independent while Rome consumed the Mediterranean world. She had survived wars, betrayals, and political conspiracies that would have destroyed lesser rulers. But on this day, everything would end. Not through battle, not through siege. Through a series of decisions made in private chambers, away from armies and crowds. The details of what happened in those final hours have been debated for over 2,000 years. Ancient sources conflict, legends obscure facts, but the outcome remains undisputed. By sunset, Cleopatra would be dead. Egypt would become a Roman province, and the ancient world would change forever. This is the reconstruction of her last day, hour by hour, decision by decision. From dawn in Alexandria to the moment history turned. This was August 12th, 30th BCE, the last day of Cleopatra. At this point, Cleopatra was 39 years old. She had been queen of Egypt since she was 18. Her bloodline traced back to Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals, who had claimed Egypt after Alexander's death. For nearly 3 centuries, her family had ruled from Alexandria, blending Greek and Egyptian traditions into one of the wealthiest kingdoms in the Mediterranean. But Cleopatra was not Egyptian by blood. She was Macedonian Greek. Yet she was the first of her dynasty to learn the Egyptian language, the first to present herself as a pharaoh in the traditional sense. She understood that power required more than armies. It required symbols, loyalty, and the appearance of divine right. By 30 BCE, that power had nearly vanished. 1 year earlier, her forces and those of Mark Antony had been crushed at the Battle of Actium. Antony, her lover and political ally, was dead. He had taken his own life weeks before, believing false reports that Cleopatra had already done the same. Now she was alone. Rome, under Octavian, was closing in. His armies had entered Egypt. Alexandria would fall. There was no question of that. The only question was what would happen to Cleopatra herself. Octavian wanted her alive, not for mercy, for spectacle, to parade her through Rome in chains as proof of his victory, to display the Queen of Egypt as a captive. Cleopatra knew this, and she knew what it meant. On this day, she would have to decide her own fate. August 11th, 30th BCE, 24 hours before the end. Cleopatra woke before dawn. The palace was quieter than it had been in years. Many of her advisors had fled. Servants who had worked for the royal family for decades had disappeared in the night. Those who remained moved cautiously as if afraid to acknowledge what was coming. At 6 a.m., she met with her remaining council. The discussion was brief. There were no strategies left to propose, no allies to summon, no armies to deploy. The meeting ended without decisions. By 8 a.m., she was in her private chambers, reviewing correspondence, letters from regional governors, reports from commanders who no longer had forces to command, requests for guidance from officials who would soon be answering to Rome. She read each one carefully. Most would never be answered. At 10:30 a.m., a messenger arrived with news from the harbor. Octavian's fleet had been sighted off the coast, not attacking, simply waiting. A show of control. The city was already surrounded by land. Now the sea routes were closed as well. Cleopatra dismissed the messenger without comment. By midday, she was walking through the palace gardens. The heat was oppressive. The gardens, once meticulously maintained, showed signs of neglect. Fewer gardeners remained. Water was being rationed. Even here, in the heart of royal Alexandria, the collapse was visible. She paused near a fountain that had run dry. For a moment, she stood completely still. Then she returned inside. At 2 p.m., a delegation arrived at the palace gates. They carried a message from Octavian. The terms were clear. Cleopatra could keep her life and certain privileges if she surrendered immediately and agreed to appear in Rome. No mention of her children, no guarantee of their safety, no promise of dignity. The message was read aloud to her council. She listened without expression. When asked for her response, she said nothing. The delegation was sent away without an answer. By 4 p.m., reports reached the palace that Roman soldiers were moving through the outer districts of Alexandria. Not looting, not destroying, simply occupying. Street by street, block by block, the takeover was methodical, organized, inevitable. At 5:30 p.m., Cleopatra summoned her physician, Olympus. The conversation was private. No record exists of what was discussed, but according to later accounts, this was when she began making specific inquiries. Questions about poisons, their effects, their availability, how quickly they worked, how much pain they caused. Olympus provided answers. At the time, these questions raised no alarm. Cleopatra had always been interested in medicine, toxicology, and the natural sciences. She had studied such subjects for years, but in hindsight, the timing was significant. By 6 p.m., she was alone in her chambers. A small wooden box sat on the table beside her. Inside were vials, preparations, substances that had been gathered quietly over the preceding days. She did not open the box. Not yet, but it remained within reach. At 8 p.m., Cleopatra requested a final meeting with her treasurer. The royal vaults were discussed. What remained? What could be salvaged? What would fall into Roman hands? The treasurer presented an accounting. Gold, jewels, artifacts collected over generations. Cleopatra listened carefully. Then she gave instructions. Certain items were to be moved, hidden, distributed to loyal servants who might escape the city. Not everything, just enough to deny Octavian a complete victory. The treasurer left to carry out the orders. By 10 p.m., she was writing letters. One to Octavian. The contents are lost to history, but ancient sources suggest she made a final request, that she be buried alongside Mark Antony, that this one dignity be granted. Whether she believed the request would be honored is unclear. At midnight, she visited her children. Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, had already been sent away weeks earlier. He was 17, old enough to be seen as a threat to Octavian, old enough to be killed. Her younger children, the twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and young Ptolemy Philadelphus, were still in the palace. The meeting was brief. She did not tell them what she had decided. At 2 a.m., she was in the royal tomb complex adjacent to the palace. This structure, built years earlier, was designed as her final resting place. She walked through its chambers, examined the preparations, confirmed that everything was ready. Then she returned to the palace. By 4 a.m., the decision had been made. At 6 a.m., August 12, 30 BCE, Cleopatra began her final preparations. She bathed, dressed in royal garments, applied the traditional cosmetics and ornaments of Egyptian royalty. Every detail was deliberate. She would not die as a prisoner. She would die as a queen. By 8 a.m., she had eaten a final meal: figs, bread, wine. Two of her most loyal attendants, Eris and Charmian, remained with her. No one else was permitted in the chamber. At 10 a.m., the wooden box was opened. What happened next has been debated for over 2,000 years. The most famous account claims an asp, a venomous snake, was smuggled into the palace hidden in a basket of figs. Others suggest poison, carefully prepared and quickly consumed. The ancient sources conflict, but the outcome does not. By noon, Cleopatra was dead. When Octavian's soldiers entered the chamber, they found her lying on a golden couch, dressed in full royal regalia. Iris was dead at her feet. Charmian, still alive but dying, was adjusting Cleopatra's crown. A soldier asked if this was well done. Charmian's response, recorded by the historian Plutarch, was brief. It is well done, and fitting for a princess descended of so many royal kings. Then she collapsed. Octavian was informed immediately. His reaction was not recorded. Cleopatra's request to be buried with Mark Antony was granted. Egypt became a Roman province within days. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended. The age of the pharaohs was over. This was day falling. One day, everything changes.